We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph from Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 34a. And the previous sum of the Gemara said that if creditors were to collect, let's say, from a short time before the nizik had a chance to collect, so the creditors are not allowed to keep it. And that's true regardless of whether the creditors, they were owed first and that was before the damage was done by the short time, or whether the short time did the damage first. And the Gemara says, why should that be the case? If the creditors were owed the money first before the nizik, why can't they collect from the short time? And the Gemara continues further, and even if the damage took place before the money was owed to the creditors, but Baal Chov Kadim, but still the Baal Chov was the first to collect. Shmami, no, do we see from here, Baal Chov Mu'ucher, that if you have a later creditor, Shekadam V'Gava, but he is first to collect, Mashagava Lo Gava, what he collects is not a good collection, that's not so obvious. As Rashi says, Shmami no B'Tmiya, the Gemara is asking it as a question. The Plugsahi B'Yama, that's actually Machlokas if that's true. The Ikalaman Damar Mashagava Gava, there is one opinion that holds that even if it's a Baal Chov Mu'ucher, even if this creditor was a later creditor, but if he collects his debt first, what he collected is considered a good collection according to one opinion. And so therefore the question is, again, over here, in this case, when we're talking about a short time, why is it that what the creditors collect is not considered to be a good collection when they take this shore as the collection of their debt? And the Gemara says, Lo no liolamei malach. Really, I could say to you, Mashagava Gava, that in general, if a creditor takes, even if it's a later creditor, but if he collects first, that's considered a good collection. Beshani Hasam, but it's different over there, meaning in this case of a short time, it's different. The Yomar Le, because he can say to him, meaning the Nizik can say to the creditor, Ilu Gabach Havi, if this animal would have been by you, and you would have been the owner of the animal when it gored my animal, so Lomi Noch Have Gavale, wouldn't I collect it from you? The High Torah, the Azkan Mine Mishtalamna, because this shore, which did the damage, I'm collecting from this specific shore, and therefore I have a right to this shore over anyone else, regardless of whether your debt came before the damage or after. It doesn't make any difference. As Rashi says, Ilu Gaboch Have, let's say you would have collected this shore before it did the damage. So Lav Minach Mishtalimna, wouldn't I collect this shore from you? But to me, is saying it as a question. In other words, of course I would collect it from you, and therefore I essentially have a right to this shore before anyone else. And Tosas explain, Ilu Gaboch Have, again, had this animal been by you when it did the damage, Lav Minach Have Gavale, wouldn't I collect it from you? Tosas ask, Tema, it's a wonder. Of course you'd be able to collect it from the person, because if the animal was by him when it did the damage, he was the one that was negligent in watching his own animal, and the animal did damage under his authority. So what exactly is the Nizik saying to the creditor? And Tosas explained, V'yesh lomar, we can explain as follows. The lo kamar ela kilomar dein guf ashor meshubed lebal chov kimoshu meshubed lenizik. The Gemara just means to be saying that the shore itself is not meshubed to a creditor in the same way that it's meshubed to the nizik. The nizik has a greater shibud regardless of the time when that shibud took effect. Shemishtalim migufo, that's the whole idea, that you pay from the guf from the actual shore. The point is that the nizik has a stronger shibud in this particular animal, in this particular shore, than any Baal Chov does. B'chein perish b'kuntris, this is also what Rashi explains, B'rei shor shanagach arbav chamisha, in the beginning of Parak shor shanagach arbav chamisha. And the Gemara continues that the two dots, Tanu Rabban and the rabbis taught, shor shava masayim shanagach shor shava masayim. If an ox that was worth 200 gored another ox that was worth 200, v'chaval bo b'chamishim zuz, and the amount of damage to the injured ox is 50 zuz, v'shavach v'yomar al arba mea zuz, but then the injured ox actually appreciates in value, and now it's worth 400 zuz. Shel mole lo hiziko, but if not for the damage, hayomer al shmona mea zuz, it actually would have appreciated even more to 800 zuz. So in this case, no sin kashas hanezik. In this case, regardless, you give according to the amount that was at the time of the damages. So the amount at the time of the damages was 50 zuz, and if you're talking about a tam that did the damage, the payment would be 25 zuz. And the Brisa continues, Kichesh, now let's say the animal actually depreciates, it weakens. By the time it gets to the trial, it's worth even less. So Kashas Hamad Bedin, we follow the amount at the time of the trial, how much the injured ox is worth right now. So it may be even more than 50 zuz of damage in that situation. Shavach Mazik, now let's say the animal that did the damage goes up in value, and again we're talking about a tam, so you're paying from the tam itself. So if the tam appreciates in value, no sein lo Kashas HaNezik, still you only have to pay according to what the tam was worth at the time of the damage. Kichesh, but if the tam weakens, it goes down in value, then Kashas Hamad Bedin, we go by what the tam is worth at the time of the trial. Essentially the nizik will lose out. And Rashi explains, Shavach Mazik, let's say the animal that did the damage goes up in value, V'yoman al Dalid Meos, now it's worth 400. No sin lo, Chafei Zuz just gives him 25 Zuz, Keshas HaNezek going by the time of the damage, Ve'ein Yochol Nizek Lomar Lo, and the Nizek can't say to the Mazik, Tainli Chelek Shmina Shabo, give me 1/8 of the animal, because that's what I was getting before, Shezachisi Bo Mishas HaNezek, that's what I got at the time of the Nezek, Uvereshusi Hishbiach, the improvement should be mine, it was in my Reshus that it improved, we don't say that. But Kiyechesh Keshas HaMada Bedin, but let's say it weakens, then we go by the time of the trial, V'no sin lo, Chelek Shmina Shabo, Shebereshuso Kiyechesh, then we just give him 1/8, and now it's going to be even less money because that happened while it was in his reshus. Well, the Kaman Parach Rachel say, but the Gemara is going to ask. It seems to be a contradiction what you just said before to what we're saying right now. And the Gemara continues. Amar Mar, the master said, we just said in the Bryce above, Shavach Mazik, if the animal that did the damage goes up in value, no sin kashas hanezik, you still pay like the time it was worth at the time of the damage itself. And the Gemara says, money, who does the Brisa seem to follow? Rabbi Shmoli, it seems to follow Rabbi Shmuel. The Amar Bal Chovu v'zuzehu demasikle, because Rabbi Shmuel says that the Nizik is just like a creditor, and the Mazik just owes him money. The Nizik doesn't have any ownership over the animal. That's why he doesn't get the appreciation of that tam that goes up in value. But let's look at the end of the Brisa. Kichesh, it says that if the tam goes down in value, Keshas Hamad Bedin, then you go by the time, you go by the amount that the tam is worth at the time of the trial, and the Nizik actually loses out. So Asan Rabbi Kiva, that seems to follow Rabbi Kiva. The Omar Shotfinin, who says that they're partners in the axe, meaning that the Nizik has a stake in the shore that's a tam, and therefore he loses if the tam goes down in value. Reisha Rabbi Shmuel, v'sefer Rabbi Kiva, so you're saying the first line goes like Rabbi Shmuel, and then the very next line follows Rabbi Kiva. And the Gemara says, lo, no, kula Rabbi Akiva here. It could be that it's all going like Rabbi Akiva. And so then the question is, if it goes up in value, so then the Nizik should gain. But v'hachav mayaskina, no, here what are we talking about? Kishapitma, we're talking about a situation where the reason why it went up in value is due to the Mazik. The Mazik fattened his own animal, and that's why the Nizik is not entitled to that improvement. But the Gemara says, Ike Shapitma, but if the case over here is that the Mazik improved the animal, so Ema Reisha, so let's look at the first case of the Brisa. It said, Shavach v'yomer al dalid meozuz. It said, let's say it improves, and now it's worth 400. No sin lo, kashas hanezik. So he gives him according to the amount at the time of the damage. Meaning to say, let's say the animal that was damaged actually appreciates in value and goes up to 400 zuz, but it said still he's got to pay him. He still has to pay him according to the damages that were done. We don't say that it's as if he's recouped his loss. And the Gemara says, now, if we're going to say in that case, Ike Shapitma, but if in that case, we're talking about a situation where the reason why the damaged animal went up in value is because the Nizik fattened up the animal and he put in work, so to speak, to make that animal go up in value. So, Tzrich Lamemer, do you even need to say that? Of course, we're going to say that that is not a loss that the Nizik will take. The Nizik had to invest money in order to make it appreciate in value. And of course, the Nizik is still going to be able to collect the damages that happened at the time of the damage. And the Gemara answers, Amar Rapapa says, Reisha mashkachasla bein de pitma pitume bein de shivcha memela. The Reisha, that first case, is talking about whether it's talking about a situation where the Nizik fattened the animal or whether it appreciated in value on its own. V'yitzrich lashminan, and it's trying to teach us tehecha de shivcha memela, that in a situation where the animal that was damaged appreciated on its own, no sin lo kashas hanezik, still he has to pay him according to the amount of damage that occurred at the time of the damage. The mazik cannot say to the Nizik, well, it appreciated on its own, you've therefore recouped your loss. He can't say that. But Seifa lo mashkachas lo ela kishapitmo. But the Seifa, the end case where we're talking about the animal that did the damage that is going up in value, that's talking specifically where the mazik fattens the animal. And so therefore in that situation, we understand if the mazik fattens the animal, the Nizik is not going to get the value of that appreciation. And the Gemara continues in the first part of the Brisa, which dealt with the injured animal. It said, kachash, that if the animal weakened, kishas hamada bedin, we follow what it's worth at the time of the trial. Essentially, the mazik loses out. And the Gemara says, kachash machmas mai, why did the animal weaken? Ilema de kachsha machmas malach, if you say that the reason why it weakened is because the Nizik worked his animal, so lema le, so let the mazik say to the Nizik, at machashas va'ano yehivna, you're the one that caused the animal to get weaker, and now I have to pay for it. Amar Ravashi says, the kachash machmas maka, the case over here is it got weaker because of that original wound. The Amar le, because essentially the Nizik says to the mazik, karna de torach kavira bay, it's the horn of your shore, it's the horn of your ox that's buried within my ox, it's causing it to deteriorate further and further, and that's why the mazik is responsible. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Shor Shava Masayim, Shanagach Shor Shava Masayim, if an ox worth 200 gores another ox worth 200, ve'ein hanevela yafa klum, and the dead animal is worth nothing. Amar Rabbi Meir says, Al zen nemar, it's about this case that the pasuk is talking about when the pasuk says, Umachru es hashor achai v'chotzu es kaspo, that they sell the living animal and they divide it in half, meaning they sell the animal that's alive, the animal that's scored, it was worth 200. If they sell it and they get the 200, and they give half of that 200 to the nizik, that nizik is going to get 100. Essentially, that means he's going to get his chatzi nizik. Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda, so Rabbi Yehuda said to Rabbi Meir, v'chein halacha, that actually is the halacha, meaning in that particular case, of course, the nizik will get 100. However, that's not the meaning of the pasuk, because kiyamtu machras ashor achai v'chotzu es kaspo, because by interpreting the pasuk in that sense, you've been able to explain the part of the pasuk which says that you sell the living ox and you divide the money in half, that you fulfilled. V'lo kiyamta, but you haven't fulfilled the next part of the pasuk which says v'gam hameis yachetzun. It says that they divide the mace in half, because in your example, the dead animal is worth nothing. There's nothing to divide. V'yezeh, so therefore, how do we understand the pasuk so we can explain it fully? Says Rabbi Yehuda, shor shava masayim shenogach shor shava masayim. Let's say, for example, an ox worth 200 gores another ox worth 200. V'hanevela yafa chamishim zuz, and the dead animal, that dead carcass is now worth 50 zuz. So the amount of the damages to the nizik is actually 150 zuz. It's going to have to come out that he's going to have to get an additional 75 beyond the 50, which means he's going to have to get a total of 125. And so in this case, shezen notel chatzi achai v'chatzi ames, the mazik, he's going to take half of the living animal and half of the dead animal. V'zen notel chatzi achai v'chatzi ames, and the nizik will take half of the living animal and half of the dead animal, and that amounts to 125, because half of the living animal is 100 and half of the dead animal is 125, and it's going to turn out that there was a loss now to the nizik of 75, meaning the nizik got exactly chatzi nezik. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Shor Shavim Masayim, Shanagach Shor Shavim Masayim. Again, if an ox worth 200 gores, an ox worth 200. Vanevela Yafa Chamishim Zuz, and the dead animal is worth 50 Zuz. Zen notel chatzi achai v'chatzi ames. This one takes half of the living one, half of the dead one. V'zen notel chatzi achai v'chatzi ames, and the nizik takes half of the living animal, half of the dead animal. V'zehu shor ha'amr b'torah divrei Rabbi Yehuda. And this was the case of the shor goring a shor in the Torah. That's how we fulfill the pasuk. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir says, Ein zehu shor amr b'torah. This is not the case of the shor goring in the Torah. El shor shavim masayim shenagach l'shor shavim masayim. Rather, the case is a shor worth 200 gores a shor worth 200. V'yein hanevela yafa klum, and the nevela is worth nothing. Al zen nemer, about this it says, Umachras hashor achai v'chotzu es kaspo. It says you sell the animal that's still alive and you divide it in half. But how do I fulfill the part of the pasuk which says v'games hameis yechetzun, that you split up the dead animal? What that means is as follows: Pechas shepichsu misa mechtzin b'chai. What it means is the amount that it depreciates the animal that died, that we divide in half, but from the living animal. And Rashi explains Pechas shepichsaso misa mechtzin b'chai, the amount that it depreciated, the dead animal depreciated, we divide from the living animal. Kilomar, what it means to say is as follows: Nevela lo shaycha gavi mazik klal. The nevela, the dead animal, that doesn't belong to the mazik at all. That's the niziks. Elashamin is a nevela, but what we do is we evaluate the nevela. Kama pechusin dama achshav mishasho yachai. How much is it worth now less from the amount when it was alive? V'nosin lo mazik chatzi apechas, and it just means that the mazik pays half of that depreciation. And the Gemara says, Michti, let us see, Bein Rabbi Meir, Bein Rabbi Yehuda, whether we're following Rabbi Meir or whether we're following Rabbi Yehuda, Hai Meir v'yesrim v'chamisha shekel, v'hai Meir v'yesrim v'chamisha shekel. It's exactly the same. Each person is going to take 125, and essentially the amount of the damages, which in this case was 150, is going to be split in half, and it's going to be 75 to the nizik. So therefore the Gemara asks, Mai beinayu, so what's the difference between the two opinions? They're both essentially saying the same thing. They're just arguing exactly what is the case in the pasuk, but what's the halachic nafkamina? And the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, Pechas nevela ika beinayu. The difference between them is let's say the nevela, the dead animal, actually depreciates further in value. Rabbi Meir holds Pechas nevela the nizik havi, that if the nevela, if it depreciates more in value, so that loss is actually taken by the nizik. And the reason for that is as Rashi already said before, the mazik has no stake in the nevela. It's only the nizik that has a stake in the nevela. So he takes any loss, any depreciation that happens to that nevela. For Rabbi Yehuda savar, but Rabbi Yehuda holds pechas nevela the mazik have a palga, that half of that depreciation, actually the mazik is the one that takes that loss, because again they're splitting not only the living animal, but they're splitting the dead animal as well. And therefore, if that dead animal goes down in value, some of that loss is going to go to the mazik. And the Gemara continues, Amarle Abaya, Abaya said to him, Imkain, if so, Matzinu Rabbi Yehuda, then it turns out according to Rabbi Yehuda, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis.